All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you're new. Thanks for taking time out of your day to check the video out. We're doing something a little bit different today, not a normal news video, but instead what I wanted to do now that it is December 1st is kind of reflect on 2024, specifically going over the PlayStation 5 console exclusive lineup for this year. The reason why I wanted to do this, well, not only because it's the end of the year, but also because 2024 has been talked about as if it is a weaker year for PlayStation in comparison to previous years. In fact, at the beginning of this year, when Sony held their yearly earnings, they came out and they said, look, we don't have any major tentpole titles that are going to be releasing this fiscal year. And for those wondering, Sony's fiscal year is going to end April 1st, 2025. So it's certainly possible that Sony could have something to announce at the Game Awards that will release in January, February, or March. But again, I just want to focus on this calendar year, 2024, and look back on it. So what I'm going to do is basically run down the list of games that Sony released, again, as console exclusive titles, meaning that they could have released simultaneously on PC, but they did not release on any other console platform. The reason why I want to do it this way is because, well, Sony clearly doesn't really view PC as direct competition. They feel comfortable releasing at least their multiplayer games day and date on PC, and they've gotten very comfortable in releasing a lot of their single player games not too long after they come out on the console. So we're starting here with January. Sony released The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. Obviously not a whole lot to say about this. A remaster, I don't think it's necessarily something that people were super excited about, but for anybody who maybe didn't play it on PS4 or who just wanted to replay it and get the better looking version on PS5. But moving into February, it was pretty packed. We have Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Foam Stars, Helldivers 2, Pacific Drive, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth ending the month. So a very packed month for PlayStation 5 console exclusives. Now, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink is a game that a lot of people really liked. Foam Stars, I mean, honestly, what's to say about it? It was some kind of, half-hearted attempt from Square Enix and Sony to put out a live service game that just, unsurprisingly did not land. Helldivers 2, on the other hand, was a colossal success, easily the biggest success for Sony this year, possibly of the generation, if you can believe it. And then we have Pacific Drive, which was a console exclusive that was marketed, I think, at a State of Play or two. And then, again, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it speaks for itself. That game may go on to win Game of the Year. But moving into March, we also have Rise of the Ronin from Team Ninja, which I think actually surprised some people. It turned out to be better than I think people were expecting, just kind of based off of the gameplay trailers that we saw. And then moving right into April, obviously Stellar Blade, one of the big games of 2024, I would say. And then May, there is a game that I think a lot of people were not aware was actually a PlayStation 5 console exclusive, that being V Rising. And then from May, there was a bit of a kind of lull period there, but starting in August, we had Black Myth Wukong, which launched as a PS5 console exclusive. Then, obviously, Concord. I mean, we all know what happened with Concord. That game literally doesn't exist anymore, but it was a thing. It was there in August. Then, moving into September, Sony released Astrobot. And then there is another title called Evo Tinction, which is not a game I'm familiar with, but apparently was a PS5 console exclusive. There's also Anatria, The Last Song. Then moving into October, Sony released Until Dawn Remake, as well as Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, but in October we also got Silent Hill 2 Remake. And then to close out the year, Sony released Lego Horizon Adventures in November. So that is the entire list of console exclusive games for PS5 in 2024. And it's kind of crazy when you look at this list because, again, 2024 is viewed as a quote-unquote weaker year for PlayStation. And, when we look over this list, I do think there is something missing. And it's exactly what Sony highlighted themselves at the very beginning of the year to kind of prepare everyone. And that is, there is no massive juggernaut, AAA, blockbuster title from Sony. I mean, the closest thing we could get here is maybe Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but that wasn't made by a PlayStation studio. That was made by Square Enix, and obviously Sony secured it as an exclusive. So I don't know if we would really count that necessarily. It's still huge for the PS5, of course. But then we see Concord, which Sony thought was going to be a big hit. Complete opposite, quite shocking how that all played out. Astrobot, absolutely huge game, highest rated game of the year. But I don't think people view that as the big AAA blockbuster. Like, I don't think people are going to look at Astrobot the same way that they look at like a new Naughty Dog game or a new game from Santa Monica Studio or something like that. But then, there's obviously the remakes and the remasters, The Last of Us Part 2, Until Dawn, Silent Hill 2. I will say Silent Hill 2, even though it is a remake, I mean, to me, that's like a highlight of the year. I think anybody who played Silent Hill 2 kind of realizes that this game was done really, really, really well. I mean, a proper remake, again, not made by a PlayStation studio, made by Konami, but secured as a console exclusive. So, yeah, looking over this list, I would say that honestly, Sony had a very strong year. We look at something like Black Myth Wukong. Sony even highlighted this title in their recent earnings, saying that this game did work for them, right? Like, it really was a game that a lot of people bought on PS5, and it really boosted Sony's numbers. And it's crazy because Black Myth Wukong, as far as we know, isn't even a game that Sony went out of their way to try to secure as a console exclusive. Apparently, they just had a lot of problems getting the game up and running on Xbox, and it may still release on Xbox, but Sony ended up benefiting from that, and it ended up becoming a console exclusive that Sony didn't have to pay for or lock down, and it ended up doing big things for them. So, I know that there's some people who are like, maybe we shouldn't count these games, but I don't know. It just depends on your viewpoint. I mean, if we're talking about games that are exclusive to one console, a person's going to make a decision. Am I going to play on PC? Am I going to buy a console, hook it up in my living room and play that way? I do think that people tend to kind of brush over lists like this to kind of see like, well, if I choose to get an Xbox, if I choose to get a Switch, and I'm not going to be playing on PC, what am I potentially going to be missing out on? And I feel like when you look at this list, there's quite a bit here, honestly. So I don't know that this is the strongest year for PlayStation. I feel like I can say pretty definitively this is not the strongest year for PlayStation. But it seems like it's one of these situations where it's actually, I would say, a very healthy mix of quantity and quality. Of course, that's going to differ from person to person. There are quite a few games on this list that I personally didn't play myself. But I think the one important thing to kind of nail down here is that if you bought a PlayStation 5 in 2024 or, going into 2024, you had a PS5, there's no denying that there is a very healthy amount of exclusive games and content here, console exclusive games and content that you had to look forward to throughout the year. So while there maybe wasn't the big mega blockbuster title to kind of close out the year or to even kick off the year, there was a lot of really solid, I would say, releases. And honestly, we look at something like Helldivers 2. I'm going to be honest, for me, that was like a big blockbuster, right? I didn't expect it to be nearly as good as it was, obviously. Did not expect it to be nearly as successful as it was. And that, ironically enough, is a game that actually sold better on PC than it did on PS5. So even though it was a console exclusive, Sony found the most success on PC. But still, this was a game that I played on my PS5 this year. I put well over 100 hours into it and is one of the highlights, by far and away one of the highlights of 2024 for me. So again, even though it's not the next Naughty Dog game, it's not Santa Monica's new IP, it's not Sony Ben's new IP, it's something that came from a relatively small studio that ended up kind of surprising me. So yeah, and you know what? I'll throw in Until Dawn Remake. I know there was a lot of consternation towards this remake, and a lot of people do see it as a actual downgrade compared to the original. But I never did play Until Dawn, and so I did pick this up on PS5. I played it, and I was actually shocked at how much I loved it. Like, it is literally a highlight of the year for me, a game that a lot of people were not excited about, a game that a lot of people said didn't need a remake, or, Sony was kind of wasting their time. I ended up picking up and enjoying it way, way, way more than I had expected. And actually, I went back and started playing the original as well, which also holds up incredibly well. And I can absolutely see why people view the remake as a downgrade in some areas. But the point being that as somebody who has a PS5 and looks forward each year to the console exclusive content that Sony's going to have on offer, Sony had a lot this year. One last thing I want to say before ending this video is that when we look over this list, it's kind of funny to see that Sony had such a strangely unique year in that they experienced the absolute highs that I think a publisher can experience and the absolute lows. And this was obviously in spread across both the live service and single player areas respectively. The absolute highs with something like Helldivers 2 being a colossal success, Astrobot being the highest rated game of the year, getting massive critical praise, but then something like Concord coming out, which is, you know, it does so poorly that not only does the game shut down after like a month and a half, the actual studio itself closes. Wild year, I would say, all in all for PlayStation. But there you go. I just wanted to kind of make this video now that we're in December, kind of reviewing PlayStation's year. And I know that we still have one more month before the year closes out, but Sony doesn't really have anything lined up for the remainder of 2024. It seems like basically they're going to maybe have some big announcements at the Game Awards, and then whatever else they have planned for us, they're going to start talking about sometime in 2025. So let me know your thoughts on all of these games and what I had to say here. Did you think Sony had a strong year? Did you think it was just an okay year? Or did you think it was a weak year? Let me know down in the comments below. Leave the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon and feel free to share the video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.